Keep ourselves on mute unless we are contributing to the conversation, please, and that'll just reduce background noise. We are recording this, so do let us know if you contact Lindsay or Riordan at any point if you've got any questions about the recording of the session or any questions about the tech. Lindsay will be delighted to help you. We're really happy for you to make comments in the chat all the way through this webinar. I'll try and keep a good eye on what's there so that if there are questions for the panel, we pick them up, but feel free to make your own comments to respond to one another. I can't promise we'll get to absolutely everything that goes in the chat because we had quite a few things submitted in advance as well, but we'll do our best to cover every area, and our hope is if we can engage with one another in the chat as well, that will prove fruitful. And then if you have a question that you feel that you would really like to ask in the moment or live, then we'll use the hand function, which you'll find along the top of Teams. For most people, if you've got the latest version, the little hand icon just in front of the smiley face. If you use the hand, I will see you and we'll be able to come to you when we get our next juncture and I'm able to ask questions. So we're thinking today about working collaboratively. So we've got new presbytery planning information, and we've got presbytery plans, presbytery reform, all kinds of real important reasons to begin to work together in new ways. Many of us have already been trying to do that at local levels within our congregations, but here we go again, new set of expectations. And so what will this look like for the coming season? How are we going to recognise the best potential for collaboration? What are the steps that we're going to need to take to make it happen? How do we know what our own capacity is for collaboration? How do I position myself well within the different teams that I might participate in? What does it look like when we're all leaders trying to work collaboratively? What does collaborative vision and planning need to make possible? And how do we shift expectations on me so that we can take things forward? All kinds of questions that cause us to come to this conversation topic today. And so we have a panel of four. I have Liz Crumlish, Rich Robinson, Fran Henderson and John Young, and they're each just going to take a moment to introduce themselves to you. So panel, if you want to take yourself off mute, and we'd love to hear from you. Go on, Liz, you go first in that order. Liz, Rich, Fran and then John.
Okay, thanks Kate. So I'm Liz Crumlish. For the past 6 years I've been working nationally for the Church of Scotland in the project called Path of Renewal, and that's been about accompanying ministers and congregations through cultural change. So working a lot with transition, and one of the huge spin-offs in that has been that notion of collegiality. Well, more than a notion, that finding collegiality as we've worked together.
Great to be with you, Rich Robinson. So I'm an Englishman living in Edinburgh, which is probably more relevant given the European Championships right now. I am part of Central, so formerly Morningside Baptist, where we do work with leadership development, missional communities, and part of a regional work called CARN, which is the work that's grown across Ireland and Scotland, supporting pioneers. And then I also do some work online, mostly in the last 18 months, creating collaborative environments for leaders, be they church leaders, denominational leaders, or network leaders.
Thanks, Rich. And we've given you a wild card. You don't need to have the Church of Scotland lingo. You don't have to ground everything exactly in our situation, but you might get us to lift our heads and think differently about our leadership. So that's great. Fran.
Hi, I'm Fran Henderson. I'm a transition minister on Shetland. I arrived there in October 2018, and 3 days after I arrived, the presbytery plan was put in place to outclose 2/3 of our churches and to become a single parish of Shetland. It was hugely imaginative and also very traumatic for people. And my job is to put that into action. We are now one parish. We have a team of 6, 3 ministers of word and sacrament and 3 MDS workers.
Great, John.
Thanks, Kate. I'm John Young. I've only ever served one parish here in the south of Edinburgh, and I've been here for about 25 years. And I suppose when it comes to collaborative ministry, well, just within my own church, working with fellow leaders, but also it's a link charge. So I sort of supervise a neighbouring minister, which is a different role. And then we're part of a parish grouping, a grouping of Church of Scotland churches. And again, that's another role, trying to work together. So that's where I'm coming from.
Brilliant. And John, we're just going to stay with you for a little bit longer. We asked you to come to kick us off with some thinking of your journey with collaborative working, some of your learning, some of your reflections. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Kate. Okay, in 3 or 4 minutes, this is what I've learned. First of all, the Bible gives us a very good image for collaborative working, and it's not a new image. It's this idea that we're all part of the same body, and I found you can apply that within the church. You can apply that with a group of churches. You can apply that to the whole church. But it's just this idea that when one part of the church rejoices, it affects everybody else. Just like when one part of the church is struggling, it affects everybody else. And we can pretend it doesn't, and we can try and cut ourselves off from that, but that is not the reality of being part of the body of Christ. And I found that very useful in just, when it comes to thinking through how I respond to the various demands that are made on me personally, but also on the church where I'm the leader. 3 words. I've tried to distill out my experience of working collaboratively, and I've come up with 3 words for which I apologize, but I'm a Presbyterian. These are words I think that really matter. And the first word is, and they're all fairly obvious, the first word is trust. Because the Church of Scotland is the Church of Scotland, there are lots and lots of differences, particularly when it comes to leadership. I've tried to list them. Theological differences, cultural differences, historical differences, practical differences, differences in character, and so if people from who actually are different in so many different ways want to work collaboratively, it does need friendship and it does need trust, and that doesn't just happen. And so if we want to build that friendship and trust within a team or within a group of churches, you have to actually create an environment where it'll grow. And I suspect that in the past, before my time, that sort of environment tended to be things like golf courses, where people met on a Monday. But that's not, I don't play golf. In my own experience, I found the best environment is where leaders commit to meet regularly, to share and to pray together, and to do that honestly and openly, where you're making yourself vulnerable and you're expecting trust. And I found that when you do that, it creates an environment where trust really does grow. And then you find it's much, much easier to work collaboratively because you respect each other's differences, you know where you're coming from, and that just frees you all up to do things better. So that's the first word. The second word is, they're all big words actually. Second word is sacrifice. And by that I mean a willingness to give something up for the sake of the body as a whole, whether it's you individually or whether it's your church, to give something up for the sake of the body as a whole. And to do that, you need a sort of sharing mentality. You need to think it's okay to share people, it's okay to share gifts. It's okay to offer things. It's okay to ask for things rather than think you can manage on your own. It's okay to, well, this is the really challenging thing, is sharing material resources. We're all struggling and we never have enough. But to be a body, we need to be willing to share. To share time, to share ideas and vision. So when you're planning something, you don't just plan it for your own patch. You think, well, how's it going to impact everybody else? Do they need to know about this? Can we work something out together? Can we make sure things don't clash? That sort of stuff. So that's the second word, sacrifice. The third word, again, another big word, is commitment. I've found through hard experience that unity is actually a gift. It's a gift of God, and so therefore, and it's a gift of the Holy Spirit at work. And you've got to treasure it. You've got to protect it, and you've got to, you know, if you don't look after it, it'll just evaporate. So you've got to work at keeping it going, and that can be hard work at times. My own experience is the biggest threats to unity, particularly in South East Edinburgh, all the churches working together. And this is the last thing I'm going to say. Two things that are really big threats to unity. One is Church of Scotland culture. Now, hopefully that's changing. But, you know, that Church of Scotland idea, well, one minister, one parish, and look after your own and protect your boundaries and all that sort of stuff. It infects the way presbyteries operate, you know, and it can infect the way we operate. And so that's something you've got to always guard against. And the other thing is a simple thing, just changes in leadership. You know, you have a really good bond and you're all working well together, and then someone retires or moves on, new person comes in, and it's almost as if you've got to start again. So those are all my thoughts. I'm going to stop there.
Brilliant. Thank you, John. I hope they're not all of them, because there's some questions coming to you now, but you've got a panel to work with. I've got a little list of some of the questions and situations that folks submitted in advance. So we'll start there, but I'm going to keep my eye on the chat function. So please feel free to get going with that. So a question that's maybe taking a step back from some of what you described there then, John. And the question is not entirely for you, John, it's just you've just mentioned it. How do you move towards a team approach of working when vision and desire don't necessarily align? How do you get started? Perhaps it feels like you're supposed to be working together rather than there being natural synergy. Where do you start?
It just boils down to relationships, I think. I mean, my own experience here is because when I first came, someone came to see me and made friends with me and invited me to join something, and I went along, and it soon became something that I wouldn't miss. It became a priority, that monthly meeting of fellow leaders. And so now I make, someone else moves in, I just take the time to go and spend, have a coffee with them, sit down, have a chat, make myself available. And it's nothing more complicated than that. You start. You've got to grow these things.
Liz, on you go.
I wonder if there's something too about finding small points of commonality. So it's not about the lowest common denominator, but just finding something that you can agree to work together on that makes a start and helps to build those relationships that John's talking about.
What if there are theological differences?
Can I just say that has been one of the real big surprises in Path of Renewal, is that people I think would agree, we've really, really bridged the breadth of theological spectrum in the Church of Scotland, and yet because we've committed to the relationships, to investing in each other, to praying for each other, those haven't affected the work that we've been able to do together. We've acknowledged that they're there, but we can work through those. I think a bigger issue actually is personality, but the theological differences can be worked through. Let me be quiet now.
Yeah, that's my experience too. As long as you know each other and trust each other, then you respect the differences. And if it would be like if Rich asked me to come and preach at Central Church, then I wouldn't preach about the Church of Scotland view of baptism. I don't think that would be a good idea, because it's a Baptist church, but we get on really well, so you can work around all of these things. But I agree with what Liz is saying about personality. Personality is the really big thing. and learning to and also gifting's another thing, you know, learning what you're good at, but also learning what other people are good at.
I think from my perspective, Kay, it is that balance. I think it starts with relationship, but trying to find the balance between relationship and task. I think the challenge is too much task, and it's sort of it's a kind of functional, transactional, my way, your way. We're busy, we don't know each other, and then the pressure, the tension comes, and it can be sort of lowest common denominator to get the job done. On the flip side, I think you have to have a foundation of relationship, but it has to then lead towards something. It's what are we doing together, or how am I helping and supporting you to do your thing, and you're helping me to do my thing. It's not necessarily that everyone has to do everything together, but if we were here together building relationship, then it would be, well, how could John serve me in my context? How could I serve John in his context? And actually, could we do something together that serves the city or the region? So I think it's that balance. You start with relationship, but you have to find the sort of the bigger why, because if it's just relationship, it can be real edification and encouragement for those leaders present, but then it takes it one step further into more active collaboration rather than just community. When we set ourselves a goal or a vision beyond ourselves together, or we choose, to John's word of sacrifice, I'm going to give my money, time and effort to help John, that makes it more active than just we turn up, we pray for each other, we encourage each other, and then we live our separate parallel leadership lives.
How do we set good boundaries and right expectations when we're working with others?
If I may speak to that, that's a really interesting one, and I think it will vary from different types of groupings to others. Ours is very geographically spread. We have 3 ministers, and basically in Shetland, north, middle and south, and we still have our primary pastoral areas where we work closest with those congregations and are the first people that would do the funerals or whatever, that kind of thing. So there's a clear geographical delineation of responsibilities there. But at the same time, we can cross those boundaries, but we do it with the old respect that ministers have always had for parish boundaries, that yes, there were times you crossed or somebody came across to you from a neighbouring parish, but you did it by talking, by asking permission, by, you know, being willing to work with each other and not undermining your colleague. If your colleague has said no to something, then you really have to talk. If you want to say yes, you need a long conversation with them before you in any way. And if you're asked to do something in their territory, if you want, whether that's a remit type territory, for example, you might have, ours is largely geographical, but we also have different remits. They're not fully functioning yet because for various reasons, but one minister has a remit particularly for mission, one for worship development and training, and one for moderating the Kirk session and for vision and leadership. And so if you have some idea or something you want to do that steps into someone else's remit, then again, that's where you talk. There's no shortcuts. There isn't. You need to talk and listen and work out the shared values that you have, even if you have different ideas how to get there. The fact is, you're not working against each other. You're still working on the same direction, and you step around each other that way with respect and with kindness. And John's word, sacrifice. I think that's an excellent word to keep in mind, in that we will have to give up and let go things as well sometimes.
Coming back to something I think Rich touched on earlier, there's also that thing about knowing your gifts and skills, and hopefully in a team having negotiated that, you know, Fran was talking about remits, that's included in your remit. So when you know what your gifts and, dare I say, calling are related to, then you can step into that with confidence rather than smudging boundaries.
How do you know when it's time for you to lead and when it's time for you to follow in that kind of environment then?
I would argue, Kay, that any collaborative relationship has seasons where you're leading and seasons where you're following, or particular areas of the relationship where you're leading and areas where you're following. So I think it's not the hierarchy and one person's in charge and everyone else kind of does what they say. I think everyone said it on the call: relationship, communication, trust, and time. That's the environment that then you can have an honest conversation to go, I think this is probably something I could serve the group by taking a lead first amongst equals. This is where I'll struggle. I think I see something in you, Liz, that would be great to take a lead in this conversation. So we're not outsourcing responsibility or going up the ladder in the hierarchy. We're actually, as a team, like a marriage or like a family, who's good at what, how do we work together to bring our best. It's the body picture of the foot, the hands, the eye, the ear, the knee. We can't necessarily do what others can do as well. And so I think it's that sense, if you've got trust, relationship, communication, you're able to lead in some areas, follow in others, and actually co-create, be shoulder to shoulder, and have 2 or 3 people that are leading and creating on behalf of the group. So it's far more like a sort of dynamic sports team, for instance, rather than a production line of you hammer this, you stick this, you do this, and who's in charge in the office and who's on the production line.
Certainly, I know when it comes to working together locally, the different churches, each church has its own personality. Each church, well, and it comes from their history and their culture, but as a result, there's some things that they're really good at. And for example, Liberty Northfield Church down the road has got a real history for stepping out in prayer walking, engaging in prayer. And so, you know, we always know that when they're involved, they're going to bring that into the general mix, and that'll have an impact on everybody else. My own church, if you were to push me, I'd say we're overloaded with professionals. So basically we offer them to the other churches. Like, if you need a lawyer, get in touch, or if you need a plumber, get in touch, or if you need some, you know, get in touch, and we try and share that out. So we're sharing our strengths as much as we can. We get to recognize each other's strengths. And it works on an individual level as well, but also on a church-wide level.
Thank you. One of the things we were talking about as a panel when we met a couple of weeks ago was about how this subject can be quite difficult for us to be completely honest with you on this session before. John's just referenced one of his local churches, and we agreed we would name people and places when we had something really positive to say, but where there has been a trickiness, it's not appropriate. But the panel themselves do want to be honest about some of the journey, but we'll need to be careful about how we refer to situations and to people. But I'd love to get you just being a wee bit more honest about yourself. Where does control come in working collaboratively? How do you battle this desire to be able to control things and maybe to be seen to be the one who knows what's happening? You're smiling, so I'm thinking you've maybe got something to say.
I can go first. Happy to. I think actually, Kay, I will answer that question, but I actually think insecurity is probably as big a kind of blocker and threat to collaboration, because when we're insecure as a leader, it's very hard to serve, sacrifice, see other people win, be quiet, play the second role. So I think insecurity, so sort of pushing ourselves forward, wanting to be in the spotlight, wanting to be seen to be in charge or having the last word, I think insecurity is a real threat to collaboration. I think the control piece, I think we all need to name that, myself included, all of us, we are broken individuals trying to do something that is impossible in human strength. So for me, my biggest threat and frustration comes where either I don't see people taking responsibility, or there is a sense of a lack of openness or humility. So not that I have the right answer, but there's not an openness. And so I think for me, that I know that when that happens in a relationship that has the potential to be collaborative, there will be shutters that go up in me, there'll be frustration, there'll be impatience. So those things that hinder relationship, hinder trust, hinder communication. And so I, in my responses, actually stop the process of collaboration happening. So I judge somebody else for being a pain and the problem of why collaboration isn't happening. And then I just end up acting in a way that actually sort of disempowers and disables the process. So I think when we're engaging in collaboration, we need to know it's exactly the same as when you become a parent for the first time. You realize just how dark and sinful your heart is, how selfish you are, how much you love comfort, control. And so as we're in any relationship, it pushes our buttons. And so we have to be self-aware, have to be self-aware. And I would say that again if I could. So self-aware of what presses your buttons, and then be accountable and be prayerful to actually live in a different spirit. And then, yeah, control will be one of 2 or 3 things that can really hinder collaboration. Because if collaboration is about relational commitment rather than hierarchy, if it's you have to collaborate, then really that's just forced working relationships. It's very hard to foster a natural collaboration when you're told to do something. So really the best collaboration comes with mutual submission and relational commitment. And if there's any sniff of control, it's very unlikely that people will do the hard yards of sacrifice, relationship building, trust, if they think there's an ulterior motive and agenda at play. Definitely.
Well, I think one of the things I struggled with is that maybe some people that know me wouldn't believe this, but I tend to cede control. You know, I kind of always assume that there is someone more knowledgeable or more capable in the room or in the team, and there's that bit about I have to force myself actually to step up and to trust myself and the abilities I have. And so in collaboration, because I know I've struggled with that, I'm kind of looking out for others who I know could take things forward and are holding back. So there's that kind of tension as well.
I think there's a very much needed a kind of balance between clarity of roles and flexibility within them as well, because my situation is a little different. As I said, we are a single parish, and my current remit includes vision and leadership and moderating the Kirk session. So in a sense, although we're trying to keep this balance, we are all equal, we are all ministers equally, but within our remits, I have more of a leadership role. That's totally different from John's kind of situation, where it's, these parishes are still separate and they're still the minister and they're just trying to work together more. We spent an entire year working out our constitution, going back and forth, meeting after meeting, trying it, adding it, taking what we put in the last meeting and removing it the next meeting, but until we got a document and a way of working that was totally new to the Church of Scotland, but we felt would work where we were, and that clarity is needed. But when it comes to, there are certain issues, lines of authority are a really important issue, like who is responsible? Because what you don't want is, oh, here we have a crisis and a big problem. We're all a team, therefore none of us are responsible. No, but the buck doesn't stop anywhere. It gets passed around between us. And he has a very important role in there. And this was particularly important for us. One of our ministers on the team has been a parish minister in Shetland for over 20 years. And now things have changed around that person. She is my colleague. I don't have authority over her, although I may be team leader in another sense. the authority is at presbytery level. So if there was ever any kind of issue that blew up in some way that involved, you know, somebody needing to take responsibility, or even a disciplinary issue of any kind among the team, it's that we'd have to deal with that. It was among the ministers of word and sacrament. So lines of authority, really important. Presbytery has set up a little team to kind of meet fair, you know, not just about 3 or 4 times a year to chat with the Shetland folks as a how are things going kind of oversight team, just so that we have that, we're not just on our own.
Great. Thank you, Fran. Fran, your connections coming and going just ever so slightly, yeah. And everybody will presume it's because you're in Shetland, but you're actually on the mainland at the moment, aren't you? But I think we caught most of it. Yeah. I'm going to pause there. I've got a couple of still more of the pre-submitted questions that are much more around a congregational level, but I'd love to pause there where we've been talking significantly about something that's presbytery wide, or in Fran's case is significantly around working with colleagues and peers, before we maybe go to thinking about how this works out at a congregational level. So as we think peers, colleagues, presbytery, what other questions do folks have? You can either pop them in the chat, you can use the hand function. What might you like to ask? Folks have had too much for lunch and now they've gone into that slumber that follows, have they? See, there's a hand up, and my Teams is misbehaving, so it's Mike. Mike, take yourself off mute and let's hear from you.
Yeah, thanks. I'm looking at the south of Angus, where we are in Carnoustie, and recognising that we'll probably be needing to build up some kind of team ministry between Carnoustie and Montefieth. I'm also aware that I've put in the chat Act 12015, the famous one about the ordination of ministers and deacons in same-sex relationships, and Act XX 2222, the one that will come next year, permitting ministers to conduct same-sex marriages. Partly because I suspect those are kind of the rubber meets the road issues when it comes to working together. And my guess is that would be a kind of defining difference between existing ministers in our area in terms of what our attitudes would be to those two pieces of legislation. And I am not prepared, I think, to wait for everybody to sing from the same hymn sheet, to get everybody on my side, and then we can go ahead. I don't think there's time for that. And that is part of the challenge that I'm thinking about and reflecting on, is how can I learn to trust, to open up, to provide space for folk with what I would regard as quite radically different views about things. And that word sacrifice that John used is quite a good one. Because if that's something that we can learn to model with each other, it's costly, it's tough. There will be people who are friends of mine who won't understand, or will misunderstand what I'm doing or what my motives might be, and those challenges will be there, but it has to work if we are going to build the church and see God do His work among us in spite of these huge differences. So yeah, kind of just wanted to say a wee bit about that around the kind of challenges that are there. That they're not issues to be swept under the table and pretend aren't existing.
Thank you, Mike. Does anybody on the panel want to respond to Mike's comments here?
Just to say that I think, you know, that comes back to what we're talking about right at the very beginning, about building up relationships, about agreeing, although we differ, to pray for one another, to support one another, to allow for that breadth that we have in the Church of Scotland.
John, you're on mute.
Sorry, someone phoned. My apologies. Yeah, it's just this idea of respect. We accept and respect each other's differences. We respect each other's integrity in holding beliefs that differ from our own. And I find that frees me up to trust people and to work with them. But as simple as that.
Kay, can I play my wild card?
Yeah, go for it.
Perfect. Less specific to the Church of Scotland question from Mike, more a general point in terms of collaboration. I think to Mike's comment of kind of wanting to get on with it, I do think, Mike, there's a good initiative around forward momentum, which can bring an energy to collaboration. Where we're moving too slowly, staring at each other, seeking to find compromise. I think, Liz, you taught the sort of lowest common denominator. It's sort of, how can we be together? That there isn't necessarily always the energy that comes from actually the need for collaboration. And so I think one of the things in terms of collaboration, Kay, I would say, is actually setting yourself a goal that you need each other to achieve, rather than just a sort of, this is our parish's to-do list, or this is our church. Then it's sort of like, okay, we could probably do that in our own strength, in our own lane, but we're having to engage with people who have a different theological worldview than us, versus let's be honest about the number of people that don't know Jesus within our city. There is enough work for all of us to get on with, and we need each other to do this. And so I think partly framing collaboration around the mission, the need, the vision, the possibility helps us to understand why we need each other. And I think to Liz's comment of actually which are differences we have to work out for the sake of the Great Commission, and which are ones that actually we need to find a place of unity but difference. And that's not easy. I'm not saying that in any glib way of sort of sweep it under the carpet, pretend they're not there. But I think often we're sort of staring at each other, trying to find a commonality, whereas actually if we kind of look ahead towards the mission and the need, we've got 96, 95, 94% of the country doesn't have a living relationship with Jesus. There's a lot to be done. And so I think there's a sense of kind of what is beyond us that we need each other for, that just gives a different perspective when we think about how we relate to each other.
Great, thank you. I'm going to ask you now to take your experience and try to stretch your thinking into Amanda's situation. So she's saying it's all very well talking about collaborative working with your colleagues, but what if you're the only minister in an area surrounded by vacant congregations, and collaboration is the imperative, but the others don't want to change?
I don't know if this is appropriate, so because I mean, the trouble is, if you've been a minister for as long as I have in the same place, there's a real danger that you start boring everybody with your experiences. So I apologise in advance. But what we try and do in South East Edinburgh is we've got a roadmap towards building relationships between congregations. So we sort of get quite a way along that, and then we have to sort of come back a bit, and then we move a bit further on. So it's not a silver bullet, it's not a perfect solution, but things like leaders meeting together. Well, you don't have any leaders apart from yourself, but each congregation will still have its leadership. Making ourselves aware of the needs of the different congregations, starting to encourage them to help out each other. Thirdly, sharing resources better, sharing expertise better. Fourthly, actually joining together to do things. This is the sort of thing Rich was talking about. Fifthly, actually, and then it goes further up until ultimately we're getting to church planting, collaborative church planting. But to have some sort of route map, I think that would be what I would suggest as the way forward. That's an answer to Amanda.
I would say that I think presbytery be involved here. Sorry, but I realise I'm freezing quite a bit here. I do apologise. That presbytery needs to be involved, because what is the plan for these congregations? If it's just, you need to be working together, that's not a map. It's not a pattern. It's not what is the ultimate aim? Are they meant to become a single parish? Are they meant to be running themselves, but in what is the actual setup that you're trying to persuade them to buy into? It just seems a little vague saying, oh, work together. when there's no roadmap for how to do that. We have, our situation is, again, with all these rural churches, tiny little congregations and little churches, we currently have 12 congregations plus some outside islands. And the way we have set it up, we took inspiration from the Guild. And that really helped because everyone likes the Guild and trusts the Guild, and it's very strong up in Shetland. And they faced this problem of a lack of people to be treasurer, to be, president and all this. They faced it about 15 years ago and completely rewrote their constitution and said, right, you need a contact person and you need a treasurer, and after that you can organise yourselves however works for you. And we have basically taken that. They're no longer Kirk sessions, they're local leadership teams. They have a contact person, and the treasurer doesn't produce the books. They simply keep an eye on the offerings and that kind of thing. And they run themselves to a large extent with an overseeing minister. That gives them autonomy, but it also, gives them a structure to work within. But that's the thing that took us a year to work out what it was going to look like. Okay, so if you want them working collaboratively, if presbytery wants them to work collaboratively, presbytery needs to produce some kind of roadmap, and a way forward, rather than just saying, well, there's one minister there and Amanda can sort it all, because that won't work.
Amanda, do you want to come in at all?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's 2 years ago, presbytery said to us, go away and have discussions about how the church might work in your area because the other two congregations were vacant. And 2 years further down the line, we're still banging our head off a wall because two congregations don't want to change. And myself and my own congregation are up for union, which is what's proposed. But we just find ourselves constantly being dragged down by an unwillingness to work together, even to the point that when shared worship was suggested over the summer months of July and August, I was told, well, we're just getting used to singing together again. We can't really come together yet. And so, I think it's great in situations where there are leaders in place who, in the ideal world, 3 leaders in this place, we could come together, we could plan, make a route map to actually bring congregations together. But in the absence of leaders, that's really, really difficult. Yeah.
You need folks alongside you. Absolutely. Thank you, Amanda. Liz?
This isn't a solution, but I'm just wondering, so if they don't see that as the way ahead, what is it they see as the way ahead? What is there being time spent in discernment in these other congregations? Is that, has their vision, if you like, is there a vision? And if there is that being listened to? So, I'm thinking of coming in the back door, if you like, if they're not willing to go with what is being proposed, what then is their discernment? And even just flagging up if that time's not been taken to actually discern what might be the way forward.
And my words, Amanda, just as an outsider, would be pick your battles. So it may not be the battle to fight and to face head on. So what it may be is for a season to say, we will offer every 3 months or every 2 months. So set yourself a disciplined, we'll offer this many months. So we'll offer 4 times throughout the course of the year. How can we serve you? What could we do together? And you're not kind of throwing your hands up in the air and walking off, but you're committing to a cycle of opening the door. And then the other thing I would say is commit to pray for them and pray for it. So the 2 things you can do proactively is pray and offer on an orbit on a regular basis, but then also just continue on and do what you're called to do and what you're to do as a church. Model collaboration internally as a church, have a healthy leadership culture, and then continue to invite them into that, or you to go to them. I think if you weren't regularly offering, then that would be something I would challenge you about, but you obviously are and want that. So I would just say, set your pattern of offering and inviting, pray for them, and continue on and do what you do and bear fruit in your context and model something in your context.
There's something coming through in the questions or in the comments back to Amanda, and Amanda alluded to it as well, around people not feeling ready. If we could just get this sorted first, We're not sure that we've done enough of that yet. How do you help people when they don't feel ready? Because there are some people who are never going to feel ready, aren't there? What do you do?
I got told once by a wise minister that people never change until they have to. And it's only once you hit crisis that people realise they have to. The trouble with that is that sometimes the crisis has left it too late, and now you don't have the people in place to make it happen. It sounds like there are some congregations haven't yet got the message about the crisis we are in, and some I don't know, real honest talking is maybe needed with them, as well as listening. And again, it's the no shortcuts. When we had to bring 13 parishes together, you know, to get them to all vote, every one of them on a basis of union, that took ages to draw up as well. We visited every parish twice in 2 months, 26 of meetings, just to listen, to talk, to work through, to make adjustments to alter how we were going to do it. And you just have to keep going, keep listening. What are their fears? What is worrying them about change? You know, and how can these fears be addressed? Or
I would agree wholeheartedly with what Fran's just said. It's almost as if there's a sociology of church culture where people like just doing their own thing, and they will eventually in a situation of crisis or struggle or desperation be forced to work collaboratively, and then they discover actually that's a great thing to happen, but there's always the pull against that. It's almost, you know, it comes out and in. But certainly our experience here has been one of the greatest gifts God has given us, is a sense that we just cannot manage anymore on our own, and acknowledge that and to start working with it.
Great, thank you. Muriel, I wanted just to give you a chance. You popped your hand up and then took it down again. Do you still have a question, or has the moment passed?
I think it's in some ways been addressed, but my concern was about how you get congregations to see that they need to work collaboratively. Because I began my ministry in a parish grouping where the ministers were all very keen to start working as a team, but when we tried to put anything into practice, radical things like only one of us needing to go into Edinburgh to visit people in hospital instead of 4 of us doing it every week. The congregations didn't want it at all. They wanted their own minister in their own church doing their own thing. And I don't know that in 15 years things have really moved on in the church in general. I see a lot of talking about collaboration, but it's mostly at the minister and leader level rather than the congregational level. And even now, having become part of a new presbytery where we're trying to do things differently, I don't think the congregations have clocked that either. They just really want the same old, same old.
Thanks, Muriel. Anybody from the panel want to come back to that, respond to that? Liz?
I think we are asking a lot of people when it's, you know, they've been indulged for so long, if you like, by that one minister, one parish. You know, it's a lot to ask that they change that, but we have to be faithful in keeping proclaiming that message, that, you know, we're not where we were, and actually, you know, there's a lot of rose-tinted glasses about where we were. So just, you know, as long as we're consistent in getting, it's not as simple as that, but we have to be consistent in sharing the message that that's not the way we can go forward. It's not just about resources, but it's not the way God's calling us to move forward as a church. It's not the way that we're called to be engaged in mission. So you know, I know there's a lot of passengers, but we need to be consistent in the message we put out.
Thanks, Liz. Our time's nearly gone. Just before we wrap up, I wanted to mention to you to make sure that you know some resources that are available to you. We have through Ascend a variety of support options for those in Ministry of Full-Time Word and Sacrament, which include the provision of a pastoral supervision budget of £240 each year that would help you to move from where you are now to where you want to be. We have a coaching team who are delighted to do the same, walking alongside you to help you to make the changes and to take others with you. There's a new coaching cohort going to be starting in the autumn that it's possible to be part of. So if you use the Ascend website, which is presumably how you got to be here today, that will take you to some of these options. Even a ministerial development conversation, a one-off, we would call it a bit of an MOT, inviting somebody in to just take a look at the whole piece in front of you and to identify a few next steps. That the fresh eyes that brings can be so helpful. So we'd encourage you to be looking for those opportunities. Worth saying that last week's webinar on managing new and changing expectations, if you weren't at that, is on the Church of Scotland YouTube site, and that will allow you to join the dots, because there are a lot of things that last week's panel said that still have relevance to what we've been talking about today. So I'd encourage you to check that out. But we said we'd finish our session today by just returning to one of the panel and asking, it's Fran that's going to finish for us, just to take 2 or 3 minutes to tie up some of the thoughts that she's had on working collaboratively, matched with what she's heard us talk about today. And of everything that's in your mind, Fran, what do you think might be worth just leaving us with as we go from here today?
I hope my connection holds. It's been really dodgy, so sorry about that. I think what's been coming out at the end there's a tension that I'm living in at the moment between tidying up the old and putting it to bed and starting the new and getting a vision for going forward, and the two are not always that compatible. And in fact, the old can take all of our energy, because we are palliative care side of things and tending. In my case, we're disposing of closing a lot of buildings. That's massive, and it takes almost all my energy. And meanwhile, I can see possibilities here, there, and everywhere, but I don't have the time personally to put into that. My job is specifically to tidy up the old, and I'm a transition minister, but I cannot leave the starting of the new because we're going to run out of time. But one thing, we've started a project with One Little Church on beginning to envision what ministry and mission could look like. It's a congregation of around 12 on a Sunday, a membership of 30 in total. And their enthusiasm and their prayerfulness is just wonderful to see. We don't know where it's going yet. We are listening to people. And one of the most useful things, and I can put this in or I can send it, I think, to Kay to send out afterwards. There's a couple of little YouTube videos about a church in Cornwall. Songs of Praise featured them about 12 years ago. And it's a little Methodist church down by the beach. And it was down to about 7 elderly members, and that meant it was going to close. And the minister held a meeting and said, we've got maybe one last shot, at things. And they decided to hand over their church to a couple of surfer Christians, because it was on the beach, really popular surfing beach, a lovely location. And then the videos go back about 3 years later, and you have this fantastic, vibrant church. But the useful learning things for our folks is that original congregation. 7 elderly people got together and prayed, realised they couldn't do this because they were never going to appeal to cool young surfers, but they must have got funding from Central Church and so on, and they employed 2 others who could do it and gave them their church, handed it over. They even had to have a skateboarding ramp in what was the chancel. And yet this is vibrant. And the 2 young guys that run it were talking about the previous congregation, if you want. And they said, of that 7, a couple have since died. They had the vision. They didn't live to see it come to fruition, but they had that vision. The others are still part of this church. They're here on a Sunday morning singing to a praise band instead of the old organ. And they said we could not have done it without them. It's the people that are so, we can't change, we just want to go back to normal, we want things to continue. They need a vision, something they're aiming for. And as church leaders, that has to be, if you want the first starting point, it will be different for every church. What do they want to be? And where could this go? Is, I think, one of our key tasks for these folks. Without a vision, the people perish. So,
thank you so much, Fran. Very inspiring to finish. Thanks so much, everybody, for being with us today. Thank you to our panel. We're very, very grateful to you. Can I just pray for us as we finish? Lord, you have been here. And we ask, Holy Spirit, that you would equip us as we go now into the reality of our leadership and our context. And we ask that you would give us hope and eyes to see that which you are doing. The possibilities that we haven't yet spotted would come clearer for us. Would you give us grace with the difficult situations and people? And we ask, Lord, for breakthrough in the situations where we long to see collaboration and we long to see impact. Lord, we ask for the people of Scotland and that there would be change in this church, that we would see people coming to know you and to live for you in the months and the years to come. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you, folks. Have a good day. Thank you, everybody.
thank